Hi guys, welcome to Paradox of Losing Cycle channel. Today we're going to talk about Gambler's Guide to Pathology of Mind. In this video, we're going to be comparing the psychological defense system to the body's immune system. By comparing the both, we will have a better understanding of the psychological defense system and how to build the strength moving forward. This will help a lot of you to understand, what's going on in terms of the mind's immune system once it is being attacked by the gambling industry or by the gambling itself. Due to the gambling activity, you're attacking your immune system, you're attacking your mind, you're attacking your psychological well-being, and we will define these mechanism very clearly so that we can move on to the next series of videos in order to build strategies and strength to build a strong mind, a strong psychological defense system in order to become more successful and leave the gambling behind. So now let's get started. The psychological defense system is the mind's immune system. Okay. The psychological defense system safeguards the mind from psychological threats and maintains its emotional well being. Now, the signs that psychological defense system got compromised are through denial, repression, projection, and rationalization, which are signs that the mind is not able to identify and neutralize the psychological stressors and threats, which are the antigens in this case. Now, we will describe this in detail as we go along. A weakened psychological defense system can leave the mind vulnerable to emotional distress, anxiety, and psychological disorders. Just as a compromised immune system can leave the body vulnerable to illness and diseases, a weakened psychological defense system can leave the mind vulnerable to emotional distress, anxiety, and psychological disorders. Therefore, maintaining a strong psychological defense system, much like maintaining a healthy immune system, is essential for overall well being and resilience in the face of life's challenges such as stress and anxieties. Now, let's describe the pathogens in terms of immune system and how it resembles risk factors in gambling. Gambling compromises the psychological defense system in a way like how the immune system responds to pathogens and gets compromised due to prolonged exposure to the pathogens. A prolonged exposure to risk factors, much like drugs or cigarette. The more you are exposed to drugs and cigarettes, basically, your immune system reacts to these drugs and cigarettes. Same thing, when you are engaged into the gambling, it compromises your psychological defense system, much like the drugs. So if you take drugs for a longer time, it compromises your immune system. If you intake a cigarette for a long time, it will compromise again your immune system. So anything that has a prolonged exposure to the antigens or to the pathogens, the immune system gets weakened. Same thing in gambling. Okay. Now, when engaging in gambling, you are exposed to various psychological stressors and triggers, much like the body encounters pathogens in its environment, resulting into illness such as anxiety, stress, and hopelessness, which will eventually eat up your mind. Pathogens in gambling resembles risk factors that increase the likelihood of experiencing negative outcomes. So the when we are resembling the pathogens in gambling, it is anything that basically has a volatility into it, okay, that increases the likelihood of you experiencing a negative outcome, such as participating in games with a high house edge. So if the house edge is high and you're not able to defeat the house edge, what's going to happen? The volatility will increase and you will experience a discomfort and you will experience a pain or discomfort or anxiety. So, by noticing this, it's important that you should avoid it. But if you don't avoid it, then it becomes a pathogen. Okay. Now, playing with another example is playing with high stakes, you know, engaging in addictive behaviors, prolonged highs and lows, constant wins and losses, volatile price action in the market. If you're a forex trader, a volatile price action, ups and down over time, it just paralyzes your mind, right? So the same thing, losing streaks, winning streaks, background music while gambling, drinking alcohol while gambling, all of these are considered pathogens. In other words, these are the risk factors in gambling that you need to pay attention to. So these risk factors are causing or compromising your psychological defense system. So these are categorized as pathogens. Okay, so clearly defining the pathogen in terms of gambling as risk factors is important as we go along. A weakening of psychological defense system. So let's describe. So okay, now we understood the pathogens and risk factors and how does your psychological defense system gets weakened in this case. So just as the immune system may become overwhelmed when faced with barrage of pathogens, over time, with increased gambling activities, the psychological defense system can become compromised when exposed to the continuous stress and unpredictability of gambling outcomes for a longer time. The emotional roller coaster of euphoria from winning and frustration, from losing uh, and continuous losing can gradually wear you down and the mind's defenses, similar to how repeated exposure to pathogens can weaken the immune system over time, leading to illness and making the body incapable to fight the pathogens anymore, which can actually lead to death in case of the immune system. So let's say drugs. If you are taking drugs continuously, the immune system over time would not be able to fight this pathogen, can lead you to death. Same thing in the gambling. If you're continuously exposed to these stressors, to these triggers and stimulants, eventually it can collapse your mind. Okay. Like how certain pathogens can evade or overwhelm the immune response, certain aspects of gambling, such as the excitement of potential winnings or the thrill of risk taking, while engaged in gambling activity, including prolonged wins and losses, winning streaks and losing streaks, highs and lows, volatile price actions, can override the mind's ability to resist impulses and maintain control. This breach and breakdown in psychological defenses leaves individuals more susceptible to addictive behaviors, irrational decision making, and emotional distress over time. So those are the symptoms, or those are the end result of the prolonged exposure to the gambling activity. Similar to how a compromised immune system leaves the body vulnerable to illness and disease due to prolonged exposure to certain pathogens. So we have given you some examples of how these risk factors look like, or how these pathogens can look like. They come in different forms. Some of them are excitement of potential winning, like you are excited of potential win. You are excited about a big win. So once you're excited about a big win, you need to spot it as a pathogen. It's a pathogen. It's a risk factor. Okay, thrill of risk taking. Like sometimes you develop very high um, uh, capacity to take higher risk. That's a pathogen. It's a risk factor. Basically, you are introducing a risk factor to your psychological defense system. Um, Prolonged wins and losses. So if you continuously face wins and losses, ups and downs, price actions, volatility, these are pathogens. These are risk factors. This can affect your psychological well-being. Okay, winning streaks, losing streaks, highs and lows. All of these are pathogens. Basically, literally, these are stressors. These are the different pathogens that can affect your psychological well-being, and your psychological defense system gets compromised. And we will describe also in more detail. All right, so let's break down the whole thing. So here in this table, what we have done is we have clearly differentiated between pathogens and antigens. In gambling, we call it risk factors and triggers. So risk factors in gambling resembles pathogens in the immune system. Triggers in gambling resembles antigens in the immune system. And we will talk about the psychological defense mechanisms, reactions to both, to the triggers and to the risk factors. Same thing, as how the immune system responds to antigens and pathogens. And this will give you a very clear understanding of what's going on. Hopefully, this will help you to engineer your own solution. All right, so let's get started. So the pathogens, there are natures. What are the natures of a pathogen, and what are the natures of the antigens, and what are the natures of risk factors as well as the triggers, and how does the psychological defense system react to them? So, in terms of pathogens or risk factors are the increasing in volatility in outcomes while gambling. For example, wins and losses, or price action in the market if you are a forex trader. Both of these have volatility, right? So these risk factors, which are increasing in volatility, okay, um, that basically in outcomes while gambling. So these that's the nature of the pathogen. That's the nature of the risk factor. Anything that has a volatility. Triggers. What are the triggers? It resembles antigens. Antigens are substances that trigger a response in the body and stimulate gambling behavior. So the psychological defense system, how do they react to them? They will get triggered in this case when they see the pathogens and the antigens, or the same way the psychological defense system when it spots triggers and risk factors, they will get triggered, okay, and deploy strategies to co-op with discomfort or threats. So your psychological defense system is trying to co-op with this by creating strategies to co-op with discomfort or threats caused by these triggers and risk factors. Okay. Next, let's talk about the variety of pathogens and antigens and how the psychological defense system react to them. So the varieties of pathogens are different forms of threats affecting the body. For instance, like in the immune system, you have viruses, bacteria, and parasites. In gambling, you have excitement of risk taking, volatility in wins and losses, hoping for a big win, etc. These are the risk factors in gambling. Um, and then antigens, the triggers, are various stimuli influencing destructive gambling decisions. For example, sights, sounds, anticipation, high bet sizes, high loss sizes, illusion of controls. All of these are triggers. So, a sound of a music while you're gambling, might trigger you. Anticipation of a high win, it triggers you. High bet size. The moment you place a high bet size, you get triggered. Okay, you get triggered in terms of higher anticipation of big win, and then when you lose, you go into a big pain. So that's a trigger basically, and then you're going to go into the higher bet sizes, and then you high loss sizes. Whenever you have a high loss sizes, it triggers, right? It triggers you to chase losses. These are the triggers. Okay, so let's clearly differentiate between the triggers and the risk factors. So we understood the triggers. Now let's go back to the risk factors. What are they? They are, examples of risk factors are the volatility itself. When you are looking at, let's say, a chart, a price action in the financial market, when you continuously look at the chart, ups and downs of the price on 5-minute chart, that's it's a risk factor because it's causing a lot of volatility and it's disturbing your decision making ability over time if you look at it in a prolonged fashion. Okay, so and then it gets you excited. Like let's say how is it gonna get you excited when you look at the chart and you keep looking at the chart for hours, you will start having illusions of or anticipation or in terms of or excitement of the price moving in a certain direction, and you start chasing a price, and then you get into trouble and you get into losses because you just got excited because you kept watching this price up and down, and then you became just excited, and you suddenly you became willing to take higher risk. Okay, so why? Because you hope for a big win, and through anticipation. So this is called the pathogen. That's a risk factor. That's a risk factor you need to manage in gambling or forex trading. Um, So how does the your psychological defense system react to this? Well, different methods used to manage psychological stressors or rationalize behavior such as decision making gets compromised. So, and what happens here that your psychological defense system will not be able to fight anymore if these risk factors and triggers continuously, basically it's operating in the environment that you're in. So the more you face these triggers and risk factors, the more you look at these volatilities in the market, the more you look at these ups and downs, or the more you face these ups and downs in gambling, and the more you go into the hoping of the big win and all of this, basically all of this roller coaster, basically what's going to happen is that your psychological defense system will get eventually compromised, and you will not be able to fight it. Okay. Um, okay. So the impact and responses. When it comes to pathogens, the risk factors uh, can cause harm by disrupting normal physiological functions or triggering immune responses, not such as dopamine level, for instance. When the pathogens are there for a longer time period, same thing as the risk factors, right? So in case of risk factors, in gambling, the more you face the risk factors, what happens, is that the dopamine level threshold gets higher, disrupting the mood and accepting higher risk bets over time with continuation of betting. Okay, now this is the impact. This is how your system responds. So the more you are facing this volatile movement in gambling and ups and downs and roller coaster and all this. Okay, so basically, what happens is that your dopamine level threshold gets disrupted, disrupting the mood and accepting higher risk along the way, and then your bet sizes gets elevated out of nowhere. Okay, and without you having a control over it, because the your uh, the neurotransmitters got disrupted. Same way as the immune system is getting disrupted, and the immune system sometimes, it overreacts. It overreacts, and you have no control how the immune system overreacts to the antigens. So, and then the impact of the antigen is different from the impact of the body to the pathogens. So, the antigen, for instance, are detect when the antigens are detected, the immune system gets triggered and mounts a defense to neutralize or eliminate the threat by overreacting. Like in gambling, individuals may respond to gambling cues with behavior such as placing higher bets, making higher bets or higher risk bets, or experiencing emotional arousal and going on tilt like all in. Okay, so psychological defense system, how they react? Well, they unfortunately not being able to minimize cognitive dissonance or maintain a sense of control over gambling habits, out of control. Basically, your psychological defense system just goes out of control over time. Okay. I've given some examples of, again, of what are the risk factors and what are the triggers. Okay. The risk factors are, for instance, are, playing with high stakes, addictive behavior, engaging in high house age games. These are all considered examples of risk factors. Triggers are, for instance, sight of a casino or sound of a slot machines or anticipation of a win. These are all considered to be triggers. Now, your psychological defense mechanism reaction to these triggers and risk factors over time, basically, you will start adopting a dysfunctional psychology in terms of denial, rationalization, projection, compartmentalization, and displacement. So let's describe what how your psychological defense system gets compromised and how do they look like eventually. So, psychological defense system gets compromised, and the symptoms are denial, number one. Okay. In denial, in psychology, denial is a defense mechanism characterized by refusing to acknowledge or accept reality. So, in gambling, individuals may deny the extent of their losses or the negative consequences of their behavior, leading to continued participation despite adverse outcomes. Number two, rationalization. That's the other area where basically your psychological defense system gets compromised. In rationalization, it involves justifying or explaining away behavior to avoid discomfort or guilt. Gamblers may rationalize their actions by attributing losses to bad luck, external factors, or the belief that they can recoup their losses in the future. Number three, projection. Projection involves attributing one's own thoughts, feelings, or impulses to others. In gambling, individuals may project their own gambling tendencies onto others, such as accusing others of having a gambling problem to deflect attention from their own behavior. Number four, compartmentalization. So it involves mentally separating conflicting thoughts or emotions to reduce cognitive dissonance. Gamblers may compartmentalize their gambling behavior by segregating it from other areas of their life, such as work or relationships, to maintain a sense of control or normalcy. Number five, displacement. Displacement involves redirecting emotions or impulses from their original source to a less threatening target. Now, gamblers may displace feelings of stress, anxiety, or frustration onto gambling activities as a means of coping with underlying psychological issues. So now there you are, guys. Now we have detailed out in terms of how to identify the pathogens and how to identify the antigens, which means how to identify the risk factors and how to identify the triggers, which are basically compromising your psychological well-being in terms of psychological defense mechanism. Now, also, we have given you guys examples how these risk factors and triggers basically develop over time because you are continuously engaged in gambling, and and therefore all kinds of triggers and all kinds of risk factors act like pathogens and antigens in compromising your psychological well-being, and eventually, you develop a compromised psychological defense system, and we have described how these systems look like. So you could go back and watch this video over and over again in order to really digest the material, in order for you to accept the reality, accept the fact that gambling is a resembles anything just like drugs, alcohol. It can resemble cigarette. Same way, the body reacts to gambling activity in terms of how the immune system reacts to pathogens and the antigens. Okay, and how it gets compromised due to prolonged exposure to these stressors, to these risk factors. That explains how why some people they become helpless, they become clueless of what's going on. They take gambling as just a pleasure, and then it ends up in a nightmare. It ends up into complete collapse of your mind, of your systems, and we described and how and why that happens. So I hope you enjoyed the video. So as I say, this video is just a foundation to what's coming next in terms of building your psychological defense system, to building the strength and coming out of this stronger, and how to build winning strategies, and how to basically take a different route completely and then just forget about this gambling thing altogether, because it's not making sense at all. Scientifically, it's just has been proven, mathematically it has been proven that it doesn't work. And gambling has been there for hundreds of years, over 500, 600 years. I mean, if you guys noticed that roulette, blackjack, baccarat, all of these games existed. Nothing changed for over 500, 600 years. Why? Because the casino, the house, they are comfortable. We know with the math. They are comfortable with the math of the roulette and blackjack and baccarat and all other games that existed for 400, 600 years, maybe even thousands of years. I mean, why? Because the math is with the house. The probability and the risk management of the house, basically, they can clearly manage their risk given the probability gives the house the edge. Okay, so when you are engaged in this gambling, you don't have an edge. What you have is just bunch of risk factors and triggers working similar to pathogens and antigens to your immune system. That's it. You are basically intaking toxic factors into your body, into your mind. That's what you are doing. It's not helping you. It's not making you rich. It's not making you money. It's not making you anything. Zilch. Okay, so it's important to understand these elements and move on with your life. So this is the foundation, guys. And then in our next video, we will be talking about more into the element of building your psychological defense system. It'll be more interesting to see how we can come out of this as winners. And again, guys, please do not forget to press our subscribe button if you like this video, so that we know that you like this video, so we can produce more and more. And also, we appreciate that you're watching this video, and hope to see you again soon. Cheers.